it's on. I'm just getting the live stream going.
Sharon, can you hear us?
I can.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. All right, I will call this meeting to order. Do a round of introductions. So to start here in the room, let's start, Tarek.
Sure, Tarek Rawlings, Senior Transportation Planner with the Deschutes County.
Kelly Kennedy, Bend MPO staff. Andrea Napoli, Bend MPO.
Eric Lynn, Strategy Program Manager for Cascades East Transit.
Robin Lewis, Bend Transportation Mobility Department.
Greg Bryant, Citizen.
Brian Podwin, Commute Options.
Matt Kittleson with Kittleson and Associates.
Tyler Diekey, Bend MPO staff.
Susanna Jolver with City's Growth Management Department.
And online, I think we have just two. So Sharon,
Sharon Smith, Bend Lapine Schools.
and I believe James DeRofi is on.
Hello, James Drophy. I'm a part of the budget committee.
We have Henry Stroud.
And-
Aaron is on as well.
Henry, can you introduce yourself as well?
Hey guys, I'm here.
All right. And I see Aaron from DKS
Aaron Berger, DKS Associates.
and Ken.
Hi, everybody. Ken from ODOT.
And Dave Thompson.
Morning.
Is that everybody online?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So just quick guidelines. The meeting's being recorded. For those online, please raise your hand if you want to ask questions during the meeting. I will keep moving. I don't think we have any public members here. We'll skip past this item. And so our next item is our meeting summaries. And so we have in your packet, there were two meeting summaries from the December 6th TAC meeting as well as the January 9th TAC meeting. And so just looking for a motion to approve those sets of minutes.
Move approval of the December 6, 2023 Technical Advisory Committee draft meeting summary as presented.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We get a motion for the second set of minutes?
Yeah, we did use the order.
Move approval for the January 9th Technical Advisory Committee draft meeting summary as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so the agenda item today is just an update on where we stand with work on the Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. And we're going to have Aaron Berger from DKS walk us through most of the presentation today. And Matt Kittleson's also going to be talking with us. And so with that, I will turn it over to Aaron and let him start this discussion.
All right. Thank you, Tyler. Yeah, so today we're going to give you the most recent update on the Bend MTP project. So this is we're presenting the results from the refined project list scenario, which we ran based off of comments from the TAC on the draft MTP project list, which we presented last time we met with you. Go to the next slide. So today we're going to talk about the refinements that we made to the MTP project list. We're going to review the updated MTP project list evaluation results. And then Matt is going to talk about some updates we've made to the project cost estimates. And then we'll briefly touch on our next steps. So starting with the refinements of the project list. Since we last met, we've added four projects to the project list. There was the Ward Road Rural to Urban Upgrade. This is US for between US 20 and Stevens Road. That was a corridor we had flagged through our initial analysis as having some significant traffic growth and no planned upgrades on it. So for both safety and capacity concerns, that corridor, we recommended that a project be added there. And since that's one of those locations that's it's kind of an in-between in terms of City of Bend and Deschutes County, it's kind of right on that boundary. We figured this would be a good place to put in the recommendation for that project, so it could be incorporated into local plan updates. Then there's the Z study. We made sure that was added into the project list, and that's a refinement plan for Revere Avenue, the Revere Avenue and Wall Street corridor between Division and Olney Avenue. Would probably like I'd like some input from the City of Bend on that in terms of if they think those are the right project limits for that study, but those are the ones we initially identified. So that's really just a plan to figure out what to do with that corridor. Then we added a key route cross-section elements review and cost estimate update study. That's a long name for a study, but this is really based off of input we received from the TAC and from policy board, as well as some needs that have been identified from the key route project implementation that's been ongoing. And then a TSP programs funding plan, which would be used to identify funding for programmatic solutions. This is also really coming from some concerns from the policy board about programs not having identified funding sources. So that would be a study. So those are the key added projects. I can pause there for a second. Any questions on those?
I've got a question. I was just wondering, where does I asked last time, there was a C6, I believe that was on county or something like that, which was the interchange possibility at the southern part of DRW around where the
correct
museum is. And I just wondered, is that included in the county or is it included here?
Which intersection you refer?
It's
the south.
It was a brand new one.
Baker.
It's south
No,
of there.
South of Baker.
Desert Museum.
Oh, sure. Okay. There's been some, I mean, I don't know if that specific, do you mean like the actual community connection that's proposed for like that?
Yes.
Use pathway there, that one.
They're gonna be putting something in there for interchange going underneath there for the multi-use pad.
Okay.
But I was thinking of it, but they also had a possibility of actually putting an exchange there. And
I'm not like super close to the exchange part of that, but I was pretty closely involved with the multi-use pathway that Ken and David Amington had applied for, where they were trying to get like declaratory ruling for the zoning
and I think there was a problem as to who was responsible for that one. Isn't that true, Tyler, I believe?
Well, I think I don't know, I haven't looked at the county TSP, but yeah, there was a discussion about a full interchange.
Okay, sure. And
They tie into the far southern end of Chiefs River Woods and to the High Desert Museum.
Sure. I'd have to, get a little close. Are you just asking like who was basically the responsible?
Well, yeah, I'd like to at least see it because this is 20 years out, 25 years out.
Right,
So
yeah.
I still would like to see that in there.
It's in the county TSP.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's the idea of an interchange without a lot of specifics, because obviously the connection point on the west side is to be determined. Certainly the High Desert Museum has been interested in it. So I think the TSP.
Oh, I see. He's asking like you're asking like if the museum has a say like as an applicant or other.
What I'm looking at is for egress. Because
Gotcha.
right now, the only egress you guys is either Brooksburg
Right.
or Baker
I got
And
you.
on the southern end, you haven't got anything.
Sure, yeah.
That was the idea of that interchange from the county TSP perspective, was that it would provide another route out of Deschutes
Yeah.
River Woods.
And you can actually put it underneath the railroad, so you don't have that.
Yeah.
Possibility.
There is I would call it the concept of an interchange without specifics in terms of, there's a lot of alternative work that would need to happen for that to move forward, but it's in there.
So-
Yeah, so it'll get carried into this
So it
planning.
is in the
It's getting carried into this planning process though as well. And
And that's
whether,
what I guess
I
I'm
just
saying
didn't-
is there's not a ton of
Huh?
details to the, there's
Right.
not a ton of details to that line item, so I don't think it's defined and who would be the
Yeah.
lead project lead or even like design specs, kind of like sort of what you're asking, it sounds like, but
And
But
Ken,
thanks,
did
Matt.
you wanna- I saw you had your hand up.
Oh, I did. I think it got covered in the discussion. I was just gonna add, again, Ken from ODOT, we're meeting with the county, I think next week, to discuss about some planning grant opportunities from IIJA about the intersection or about the interchange, and really just how we move forward with that concept. Yeah, as Matt pointed out, right, it's still kind of loosely defined in how that would be designed. I think every detail is still kind of TBD, but the point would be another point of egress out of Deschutes River Woods for fire safety.
Robin,
On the Z crossing limits, I think the hole in that is Revere itself, to Fourth. So.
What- yeah, I was
Fourth
gonna
and
ask.
Third, not just the division intersection to the west, but to the east as well.
I guess
Working with ODOT on that earlier, what's this idea of how do you get walk, bike,
Right.
in a center turn lane for safety?
I think I was I'll put Ken on the spot. I think, doesn't the 24-20, don't you have funding in this 24-27 timeframe to do a study of Revere on, from the west side of the interchange all the way over to 3rd or 4th Street?
I'll have to check, Tyler. Off the top of my head, I want to say not in this biennium, but that could change in our next biennium, that 24-25 that would start next year.
Okay.
ODOT had a more quick hands-on project that was using some rail.
Yeah, I know there was gonna be some funding at least to look right at the rail intersection area, but I was thinking that was gonna be
And the
extended.
difficulty was the city, we didn't have our project lined up, or the MPO didn't have a project, so that project was out ahead a little bit and we were trying to catch up, but we didn't have anything to back.
I got you now. Yeah, we are. So we do have the Rail Avenue Improvement Project. We actually met about that yesterday. So a larger planning project that's in the Revere corridor. I'm not aware of any funds for that, but we're kind of doing some plan engineering, as we would describe it, is to try to figure out what that would look like in the meantime, because there is funding for the railroad crossing improvement.
Aaron?
Yeah, so first of all, South Interchange, I think that's a good comment, and those are helpful for us, because I think that was something we intended to include in the project list, and I don't believe it shows up on the project list. So that's just an oversight. We'll make sure that's incorporated, because that was something that we plan to add. In terms of analysis and evaluation, that's actually at the kind of beyond the extents, or right at the fringe of the travel demand model. So that's not something we'd likely actually test with that tool, but we would include it in the project list. And then for the Z study limits and extents, Robin, I think that one will, just give us the comment on the memo in terms of what kind of the scope and scale of that study that you're envisioning. I kind of picture it almost like sort of like the Reed Market Plan, right? Which is kind of the multi-jurisdictional project that brought together a few different pieces. Again, for right now, purposes of the MTP update, it's just making sure we get those limits right and a reasonable estimate for what we think that study is going to cost.
Well, I think, I mean, isn't there geo bond funding for some improvements in that Z area?
Yeah, a little bit.
So there's
Yeah.
at least a little bit of funding, so I
More than fear, there is.
thought there was.
No, there is some, let me pull it up.
Yeah.
It'll take me a sec.
So I think there's geo bond funding dedicated to at least some improvements in that, from the Portland, Wall, Revere area. 2 million, maybe, it's coming to mind.
And could we use this decrossing refinement plan to identify what they are?
Yeah.
Because that's always the problem with, once we have a capital project, we are not sure what we're trying to accomplish.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions on the added projects? And then modified projects, we had the OB Riley Road upgrade from Hardy to Archie Briggs. We essentially rescoped this project to exclude the more capacity enhancement side of it and keep it just focused on the multimodal, because that corridor with the way the land use assumptions have changed for that area back when that project was originally identified to today, we're not seeing the same traffic growth or capacity constraints on that corridor. So that project is going to be more multimodal oriented. All right. No additional questions on that? Can move to the next.
Sorry. I don't think there's a study specific to the Z. I mean, go bond funding.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
So on to the updated results. So we had those new projects, which several of those don't change anything in terms of system evaluation, right? The studies don't have any change there. But there have been some updates to the Bend Redmond travel demand model since we talked last. TPOW has been working through some pretty extensive updates on this tool. So there's some results that have changed since the last time we've talked, both for our baseline, so our 2019 and our 2045 no build, or think about that as your 5-year project list scenario, and then our 2045 MTP project list, which is now that refined project list. So some changes that have happened on the model side of things. There's been some refinements to the cost of travel assumptions in the model. This has resulted in more sensitivity to transit, walking, and biking modes of travel. So it's actually made the model more reactive to improvements for transit and walking and biking. There's also been some updates to the external stations. And modeling terms, those are the entrances and exits to the area. So think of like US 97 north of Redmond, or US 20 north of Tumalo, those areas where trips from the rest of Oregon come into the area. So there's been some updates to that based on ODOT's statewide model, the SWIM model. That those changes really only affect our primary state facilities. So think like US 97, US 20. So there were those changes that have happened since our last, since we last presented results. And then there's been some refinements to how we are modeling some of the projects on the 2045 MTP project list. So we already talked about those new and refined capital projects. So OB Riley and Ward Road, the two that had some changes in the model. We made some modifications to CET Route 8 that's resulted in some better transit coverage, and that's just reflecting the most recent information we have on the transit routing. And then we've updated some of the assumptions reflecting the TDM programs and policies. Those are some proposed projects that were included in this project list, and with ODOT making some changes to the model regarding cost of travel, we went through and did some updates to some of the kind of cost elements of these assumptions. So things related to like parking pricing, making sure that the the dollars we're using align with the dollars in the model. These changes have increased the mode shift to transit, walking, and biking trips in those TDM targeted areas. And then we updated the mobility hub assumptions to better reflect the planned active transportation enhancements that would be supporting these locations. And that's again kind of a model details that we refined a little bit based on some back and forth with TPAL on that. So these are all changes that happened in the model. And so we can go to the next slide. And so the results we're showing today both include those project changes that we talked about and these changes within the model structure. So this is looking at some of those key performance metrics for active transportation, just looking at the change in ADT on key routes. This is something we had kind of detailed out in the prior memo. Not a lot of change in this from what we saw before. I mean, the same general trends. The increases you're seeing are, well, up on 18th Street. That's because one of the projects we included in the project list is that north interchange. So north of Cooley, basically an 18th Street interchange with US 97. If that goes in, there's going to be more traffic on 18th Street. So that's why you see the volume increase up there. That other thick red area, that's actually the Yeoman extension. So that's obviously going to show increased traffic because there is no roadway there now. So that's just new traffic on a new roadway. But to the south, we see some improvements on 27th. That's due to some of those internal connections in the Stevens area, so Stevens Ranch area. And then the red you see downtown, that's some volume increases generally caused by some of the right in, right out restrictions onto the parkway. As some of those locations are closed, you get some volume shifts. There's some positives and negatives with those. Obviously, everything, there's a balance. There's some corridors that improve significantly, have a decrease in traffic, and then there's others that have an increase. The one I want to highlight is Neff Road. That decrease that you're seeing on Neff Road, so that's east-west, that green, ignore that little red in the middle. That's just because a link is broke or got broken by a project, so disregard that piece. But that segment, the green on that segment, is primarily driven by mode shift. So the decrease compared to our essentially no build scenario versus our MTP project list is not caused by like a parallel route or something like that that's been put in or had added capacity or anything like that. That's actually, those decreases are driven by shifts to other modes of travel. So that's a significant benefit to that key route. We're actually reducing travel on it. Again, not compared to present day conditions, but compared to a no build condition. So that's what this figure means. But similar trends to what we showed you before. Any questions, or ready to go to the next slide? So what does this mean in terms of some kind of system level measures? The changes I talked about in the model, you can start to see those when we look now at our MPO area mode split. In our base condition, the model shows a 10% walking and little over 3% biking mode split. Now, again, these numbers are model numbers, right? So take them all as a kind of relative to each other. What we're focusing on is the trends, I mean, not so much as the totals. So you can see the biking trips stay pretty constant between our base year and our future no build condition. Pedestrian activity actually increases going to that no build condition, and some of that is due to the land use decisions that are being made in that growth 2045 growth year. It's promoting more pedestrian travel as well as some of the transit expansion that's happening. Then the 2045 refined project list, you can see our walking trips have increased by another full %, and the bike trips have increased by another full percent. Those numbers, it doesn't look like a lot when you're looking at this table, but that's a percent of our total model trips in this area. That makes a really big difference. When we're talking about some of the other measures that we'll be looking at later, in terms of measures like VMT per capita, and then also some of our key corridors, those mode shifts are happening in places that we really need some relief. So this is probably the biggest mode shift I've ever seen in the BRM model, and a lot of that's due to the updates that TPAL's been making recently to make it more sensitive. So these are pretty significant results for us. Go to the next slide.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
I know you're just a pedestrian and bicycle there, but the transit is from the no build to the refined. I mean, that's a huge difference there.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that. I've got another section. You'll see this table again.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll touch on that as we keep moving through. But yeah, you're right. It's a big change. So this is now shifting now into the transit side of things. First, looking at this comparison of looking at the jobs and household transit coverage. So you can see here is where we're adding jobs and where we're adding households, and then how does that line up with our 2045 transit system using a 25 or a quarter mile buffer, right? So that's kind of your prime catchment area for these future transit lines. How is that lining up with our growth? So you can see we're doing a pretty good job, particularly in that Stephen Ranch area. We've got better coverage down there now than we previously did in our no build, picking up more of that new growth in that area, at least giving those folks access to transit. You can see the Elbow area or southeast is still a little bit underserved in terms of transit access. All right, next.
Of course, that's all subject to change too, as we get a mobility hub at Stevens Ranch with the library. We really explore different route configurations.
Yep. Yeah, and as you'll see, I mean, we'll get to these results in a second too. Transit coverage, it matters. If we can reach some of these areas, we're starting to see in the model that they're starting to really see that sensitivity, especially if the land use and the future demographics for some of these growth areas are supportive of that transit mode choice decision. As long as we can reach it with a transit line, then we've got potential to pull trips.
I got a question on that though, is what's being done to bring in the households and the jobs in some of these areas where there's nothing right now, like in the Thumb area. I mean, I was with CTAC over 5 years ago, and that was still there, and it's still there, and nobody's there. So my question is, what's being done there?
In terms of development in the Thumb?
What is the city doing about that? I'm just wondering. I mean, it keeps on putting jobs and households there, but there's nothing there.
Well, I think part of that is in the urban growth boundary today. And, there were 10 or 12 distinct UGB expansion areas were identified through the UGB expansion process. And almost all of those have been annexed into the city. And so that Thumb area is one of the last. There's only 1 or 2 areas that haven't been annexed, and that's one of them. And so I think in the future, that area will develop. It's just, it's totally dependent upon.
Right now, half of it.
About half of it's
in UGB, and the other half's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was kind of an intentional phasing with like the Elbow area and then the Trosa area got a lot of attention, and they're planning on focusing on there a little bit later.
Okay.
At least that's my understanding.
Yeah.
And the mapping on this is a tad awkward too, because we're showing these as these are the zone geographies of the of the Ben Redmond model, which don't necessarily all line up with the UGB boundaries. So while we're showing the entire thumb as having growth, that that growth actually really just reflects the only the UGB portion of the thumb, which is, as you're right, about half of it. So, yeah. Any other questions on that? All right, so moving on to our looking at some of these measures, you can see that the coverage, so that's based really on that map you're looking at, but looking at all households and jobs, not just the growth. You can see that we're still having a decrease in coverage in the future because we're only adding really one additional transit line. And even though that one's doing a good job of targeting some of those growth areas, there's still additional growth areas that are outside of these transit buffers. So that's why you're seeing the decrease, but we're still getting coverage across more than 66% of all jobs and over 50% of the households in our refined project list scenario. And then this the second table shows us the transit trip increase. So in the base year, we're at less than 0.2%. In no build, it's even a little bit worse than that. But then with our refined project list, we're pushing up towards 1%. Take these numbers with a grain of salt too. They could actually increase a little bit more. TPOW is making some additional adjustments in the model right now related to cost of transit travel, reflecting back kind of to those other cost of travel assumptions that they've been updating. So the direction that these numbers would go with those adjustments would be in the increase direction. So we'd likely, particularly for that 2045 refined project list number. So we could see these go up a little bit. I wouldn't expect a big jump, but we'd probably see more benefit in addition to what we're seeing now. So again, that's a significant increase over the base and committed to our 2045 refined list. So that's kind of the outcome of a lot of those, and a lot of that's driven by those TDM areas. The mobility hubs are doing a good job of pulling trips. All of that is combining to increase these transit numbers. Next slide. So combine those all together, and that's the same table we showed earlier. This is where we start to see how that affects trips as a whole in the model, right? So comparing our no build versus our refined project list, you can see we've shifted about 3% of our trips away from motor vehicle into non-motorized. That's a big number when we're talking about something like VMT per capita, which we show on the next table. You're seeing that decrease in VMT per capita between our no build and our build. That's that -7%. But also we're seeing it between our base year and our 2045 MTP project list. We're seeing a 2.5% decrease. I've been doing this for a while with the city, Ben, back to the UGB process, tracking this VMT per capita measure. And again, this is a draft measure that the VMT per capita methodology is still being refined by ODOT. So there's a lot of details in there, but the trend we're seeing here, this is the first time I've seen this trend go in this direction, which is not an increase between our base point that we're looking at here in 2019 and then our future year of 2045. I'm actually seeing all the integrated land use and transportation planning finally starting to push that measure in the other direction. So that's why I highlighted that one. It was a kind of exciting moment for us when we pulled the data from these model runs and saw that for the first time. Any questions or comments? Next slide. So what does that mean on the system? Well, this is looking at our peak hour And then these are volume shifts. This isn't the cleanest map in general. Volume difference plots are not the easiest things to show, mostly because if you've got changes in your network, which we have between our no build and our build, then those tend to kind of cloud some of the results. But we're seeing a lot of green. Green means volume decreases, peak hour volume decreases. And it's, as you can see, it's on some pretty important corridors. On US 20, for example, we're seeing some significant decreases, as much as 10 to 12% of the PM peak hour volume compared to that no build condition. That's quite a bit. And that's really driven by some of those mode shifts, because those are really targeting some of our key corridors. It's not super clear looking at this figure, but on the river crossings, we have about a 5% decrease in PM peak hour vehicle traffic crossing the river, which is one of our biggest constraints in the system. And that's also, again, driven by this mode shift. So we've been able to do that essentially with mode shift, not with capacity adding projects or anything like that. You can see the Neff Road corridor, that was one we highlighted earlier. You see the decreases there. Some of the decrease, like the decrease on 27th to the south, that's due to increased connectivity in that Stevens Ranch area. So that's not quite as that's not primary. Part of that's mode shift, but part of it's also additional network. But overall, you can see quite a bit of green, and that's what you'd expect when you see that VMT per capita starting to decrease, especially compared to that no build condition. You'd expect this figure to show a lot of green, where there's less vehicle trips on the network. Any questions on that?
Okay, I've got another question on Baker and Knott. We were having an interchange. Where's that at now? I mean, we had I am whatever it is. I was on the committee, and I was just wondering where that stands now, because that would take care of those reds down there, I believe.
Yeah, and remember, red on this doesn't necessarily mean congestion. It just means that we have more traffic than no build. Green means less traffic than no build. Red means more traffic than no build.
Okay.
So red isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've tried to screen out the new links, because those all show up as bright red, because obviously they had zero traffic in no build, and now they have traffic. So those are screened out. So the increase you're seeing down at Baker, that's driven primarily by the by some turn restrictions at China Hat. Right, because as part of we've included the China Hat overcrossing project, but we've also restricted access at that location. So some of those trips get pushed down to the Baker interchange. Others move up to Murphy. So that's what's driving the red down there.
Also, at this point, since that's at the phone, does that also include the household increase in households and the businesses there or not?
It does, but this comparison is 2045 to 2045, right? Because this is a no build 2045. So it's the exact same land use assumptions.
Okay.
Yeah. Key with this is it's not a growth plot, it's a difference plot, right? It's a comparison.
Sure. Okay.
Karen, can you help me understand the downtown areas, the increased trips?
Yeah.
Scenarios, given some of the kind of land use planning that's going on.
Yes. The one you're seeing right there, I believe that's, let me, I have this on another screen so I can double check it for sure. Or I think that's the increase you're seeing is Franklin. Because we've kept that right turn open, and the right turn onto Hawthorne was closed. So the southbound right turn at Hawthorne, no, actually I think that's open.
They're loading
Double
up.
check these.
here.
Yeah, it's a shift between those two. So with the right in, right out closures, that's one of those things I mentioned earlier where we're getting some volume shifts between roadways. With those, you're gonna get that obviously if you close an access point. So that's what's going on there. So Franklin's seeing an increase. It's getting more popular. As long as we leave that right turn open, it's going to be picking up more. And then let's see that the Parkway increase is that's a balancing thing. I think there was an issue in the original no build, so you can disregard the red on the Parkway there. And then there's some increases on 3rd Street. That's also primarily driven by right in, right out restrictions on the Parkway, right? Because some of those local trips shifted off the Parkway and onto 3rd, which is what you'd expect. A lot of this lines up pretty well with what we saw in the Parkway study when we did some right in, right out closure analysis for that area. But pretty much everything else downtown is a decrease compared to the no build condition.
Casey?
Yeah, well, I just kind of want to go back to that concept of the VMT reduction. And I'm just kind of curious, I'm sure you guys had some conversations as you somewhat ground truth, what the model's showing you versus, we'll say, the last 10 years in our trajectory. But I'd be kind of curious just to hear maybe what discussions did you have to, again, kind of bring this back to reality? I mean, you could say the skeptic in me wants to say the reduction VMT due to, I think what you noted as, enhancements to the transit system, improvements to connectivity, and careful balancing of land use. I'm still surprised and have a bit of disbelief. So kind of help us understand that better.
Yeah, well, Casey, honestly, what it's been is the model's finally starting to show what we expected it to show a long time ago. With the way the land use has been planned, the mixes of land use in the growth areas, the enhanced transit connections, the increased connectivity, all those things should be helping us decrease this VMT per capita, which is essentially shortening trip length, right? There's two ways we can decrease VMT per capita. One is decrease trips, and the other is decrease trip length, right? So the connectivity and the land use mix that can help us with the trip length side of things. But that's still that one's a tough one at times to mess with. The other side of it is on the mode shift, and we weren't getting any mode shift before. The model was just not giving us any sensitivity to that, and part of it was because it was based off of some older assumptions in terms of cost of travel and things like that. A lot of the base assumptions of the model were developed in the 90s. So the TPAL's been going through with newer data and updating a lot of these assumptions that most of this is based off of. With these updates, we're seeing an increased sensitivity to the effects of congestion and things like that, which make folks more likely to consider other modes. So that none of the numbers I'm showing they're not, to me, they feel dramatic just because I've worked with this model for a long time, but looking at it from the outside, there's nothing that crazy about them. A 1% increase in bicycle travel in the next 20 years, as a net of all trips, doesn't seem unreasonable for the area. That feels low in general. It feels very low, but again, the model didn't used to show that at all. It showed, if anything, it's staying exactly flat on most of these measures. So now we're starting to see that sensitivity come in, and finally that we get to see the benefit of all this pretty intensive land use planning and commitment to a multimodal system that's finally actually starting to show up in our tool. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's more that the models, it's hard to say if the model is even going. I wouldn't say it's I'd say it's still fairly conservative with how it's estimating these numbers. It still feels very conservative to compared to what you see out in the out in the field in general at Bend.
Yeah, and I was gonna just echo what you just said, Aaron. I think in terms of this is, I mean, to me, I think for the first time, I feel pretty comfortable saying these are probably pretty conservative forecasts. And that I think, you know, as the city moves to implement protected bike infrastructure, from what we're seeing, there's data starting to come out now from Massachusetts and other places where they've been doing. They're a little bit ahead of us in terms of some protected bike infrastructure, and they're seeing huge increases, you know, and huge shifts to that infrastructure once it's available to folks. And so between the, you know, I think the bike numbers are probably low based on what we think could potentially happen. I think with some of the land use planning that's happening, the pedestrian walking trips could be significantly greater. And then the other thing I was going to say too is just, you know, following on what Casey was saying, you know, just remember that decrease, that's a per capita decrease. I don't think we have a table in this summary, but total VMT, you know, is forecast to increase massively between now and 2045, because we're looking at adding another 50,000 people. And so their, you know, individual driving behaviors may change a little bit, but when you add 50,000 people, and they're all doing at least a few trips per day driving, you know, we're going to see a pretty significant increase in total VMT over the time, you know, over the planning horizon.
And are we still holding that metric that 25% of trips in Bend are less than a mile and 50% of trips are less than 3 miles?
Have you looked at those stats, or, you know,
I haven't pulled that one, Robin. I like that measure. But I haven't pulled that from this. I'll note that one because that's something we could probably report. And that's something too. Was that always, you remember, was that a model measure or was that something that came out of the census?
The census.
Okay.
Yeah, I seem to remember us pulling it out of the model at some point, you know, over the last 10 years. So
It'd be good to check that because, you know, in that case, if kind of the mile is that walkable distance, then we're roughly capturing half of all available trips that are a mile or less. But the biking is awfully low if 50% are bikeable.
Yeah.
1.5.
And the other thing this model's not real sensitive to is the recreational side of walking and biking trips, right? Like we just aren't really capturing that because there's you know, but the exercise trips essentially, right? I take a lot of biking trips that wouldn't show up in a travel demand model. And a lot of folks do. So some of that too, that sensitivity will probably until the Ben Redmond model shifts to an activity-based model, which it will. That's the plan in the future. That's when you'll start to see more of those. Probably first time, and it's going to take some time because the activity-based models take a minute to develop. But first time we see results from that, I would suspect you're going to be seeing some radically different numbers in terms of modes split, just because a activity-based model focuses it's more person-based, right? It's very like, what does a person's day look like? And it would include exercise and things like that. And that's where you'll start to see some of these other trip types really pop.
I got just for my education on the bicycle part of it, that includes anything that's electrical, you know, electric bikes, scooters and everything else. Is that
yes? For now, that's the assumption. Again, this model is built and calibrated off of older data still, right? So it's still based back to 2010, a lot of 2010 information. So our assumption right now is, yes, a bike trip on here is either e-bike or regular bike. But that's something that's continuously evolving and is, that's going to have some changes on the modeling side of things as TPAL continues to change things.
Yeah, that's a good clarification, Greg. Because I think in the future, as we get better data, you're going to see E-bikes have the potential to really change. I
And the
mean, they are
scooters-
changing it today,
Scooters
right?
and everything else I'm seeing all over the
Yeah.
place, so that's gonna be a big.
Longer
deal.
distance trips are much easier.
Yeah.
Trips with a lot of, hills are much easier
Yes.
now. I mean, for a much bigger swath of the population.
Yeah.
So I think these numbers are fairly conservative, just given what we think
Yeah.
could really happen going forward.
For context, in the model, the assumption driving some of the mode shift stuff is that a bike trip, the average speed on a bike trip is 10 miles an hour. That's not terrible if you think about, if there's signals and things like that, that can slow you down. But on an e-bike now, that number that's going up. I don't have an e-bike, but when I ride to and from work, I have trouble keeping up with the e-bikes, and I know, and I ride hard. So I know that number is probably pushing more into the 15-mile-an-hour range, which is pretty significant when you're talking about the utility of a decision between a car trip and a bike trip. So yeah, I mean, this is stuff that's going to keep updating continuously, but one step at a time.
Ken?
I think most of the topics I was going to bring up were already covered. I was just going to mention the model probably doesn't capture micro mobility mode shift that great. And so to echo what Tyler mentioned, these are probably pretty conservative. I think when we look at other studies that have been done across the country, mode shift with e-bikes is probably a lot higher than what we've seen or what we necessarily have in the model. But it's, again, working with the best data that we have. And the other thing, Tyler, I was going to add, I was just going to clarify, I was incorrect. That is for Revere Avenue, that is a planning phase for the rail crossing. And so I can update you all another time at a tech meeting about that project.
Great. Thank you.
And to Ken's point too about micromobility, that's correct. For the mobility hubs though, actually we have come up with the methodology we're using. It's basically faking in micromobility into the model. So there is some sensitivity to that, at least at the mobility hub locations in these results. So that's something we have worked in there. It's not perfect, but it's something more than just kind of letting the model do what the model does. We've actually put some stuff in there to increase that catchment area for micromobility. All right, next slide. So here's some of those just general measures. Don't need to spend a ton of time on this. This is a table I think we created in the prior memo. So it's just some trends in terms of like vehicle hours of delay. This is pretty motor vehicle focused. As you can see, even with that VMT per capita decrease, as Tyler was pointing out, we still have a lot of traffic increase, right? So you can see on all facilities, Deschutes County, ODOT, and City of Bend, we've got significant increases, but we are improving quite a bit over our no-build conditions. So the projects we put in are working, but there's still a big increase over that 2019 base. Next slide. What does this look like on the system? So this is back to our ubiquitous VC plots that we've been showing for years. You can see on the left is that no build. I think it's still titled committed on this one, but same thing, 2045, 5-year no build scenario. And on the right is this updated MTP project list. One thing that this doesn't reflect well, some of those corridors that I was showing the green on, for example, like Neff Road, you can see looking at the two at Neff Road on both of these plots, it looks fairly similar. You see a little bit of light red, which that's actually a big deal because that means it's dropped below a capacity of 1. But even the dark red on that corridor is now, we're talking like a VC ratio or overcapacity of about 2% overcapacity versus it was more like 20% overcapacity in the other model. So you're not fully capturing some of the benefits on these corridors. Even the dark red on the right is less dark red than it was on the left. So there's some improvements that are pretty visible, just looking at corridors overall. And then there's also quite a bit of hidden improvement as well on the congested corridors, because those were the ones that we saw the most direct benefit from the mode split. So for example, the river crossings, like I said, those decreased by 5%. They're still well over capacity, but all of them saw decreases because that mode shift kind of had a nice spread impact across all those locations. So same key issues: river crossings, Reed Market Road, and yeah, some issues on 27th and Neff Road near capacity, but like I said, getting a lot more manageable than it was previously. And then the Parkway overall still hanging tough, just under capacity, but that Colorado interchange is particularly challenging, as is Revere. Yeah. Any questions, thoughts on the congestion plots? All right, I'm going to kick it over to Matt, and he's just going to give us an update on the project cost estimates.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. So we've been helping go through and do some various updates to the cost estimates. A lot of them are what Aaron discussed previously, with just changes to projects and making sure that the project cost estimates reflect changes to the projects that are out there. We've been utilizing the methodology that's been developed kind of over time through the Bend TSP and then also the GeoBond, looking at really high level unit cost type approaches to linear foots of different types of projects, intersection treatments, et cetera. What's exist for the city has been developed through various projects and planning efforts. So there's some that go back as far as the UGB work that we've been updating to indices, ENR index, et cetera, trying to make sure that they're scaled. And some of those indices suggest pretty significant updates to cost based on just over time, and particularly the last 3 or 4 years. I think if you go back even just half a decade, the changes are north of 20% of construction costs. So certainly many have realized that over time, that's a real factor in terms of making sure we have enough dollars to program for these. So as I mentioned, modifying these, and then just the scenario updates as well that Aaron was talking about. So next slide, go into some more specifics. So a couple key changes. The only one that Aaron talked about, looking at adding just sidewalks as opposed to 3-lane upgrade for that. Sorry, not only O.B. Riley, for that one. And sidewalks are still expensive, so it's still a significant project. I think we long ago learned that getting sidewalks in is not necessarily an insignificant project, so still significant investment for that. Canby Ward, Aaron mentioned earlier, so expanding that one out, and then also modifying where intersection improvements have happened, making sure that those are removed, and that goes across the board, where like 15th and Wilson, for example, was kind of lumped into a bigger project, so making sure that that gets excluded. Some of the things that have been built along the Hamby corridor are removed, and then also bond projects that are already programmed. That's broadly a project list, but then also where those exist within the existing planned projects, as I mentioned, those nuances of where things are bundled together. And then we're continuing to work to refine various elements of the project cost that would really, at the end of the day, only make the costs go down, particularly the 27th Street corridor. We spent a lot of time with Russ and others at the city looking at this for some of the SDC work, because there's just been a lot of various people building various things along the 27th Street corridor, whether it be development or what's already happening, what could be happening. And then also this is a particular spot where things like the ITS plan and some of the TSP work overlaps. We want to make sure we're not double counting cost, where and this happened along Neff, where we want to put fiber in for connection purposes while we're putting in a multi-use path. It doesn't need to be as expensive of a project because we can do a lot of that in one swoop as opposed to two separate dig and cap type projects with underground utilities. So that one in particular is going to be refined. It also is pretty significant as it relates to the Southeast area plan because that's a big cost down there in terms of how to just make 27th Street and as it curves around to not meet urban standards in the future. That's a high level crash course on cost. It overlaps a lot with just project refinement. So any questions on those or things we can dive into further?
And I think to kind of build on what Matt was saying too, this is where you have the materials, obviously the memo and the project list there. And I told you previously to kind of hold off on reviewing the cost estimates because that was a piece that we were still refining. Now that we've done that, this is a good time for everybody, you know, from your different jurisdictions, people who have been involved in these different projects to go through and take a look at that and see if well, one, does that order of magnitude make sense? Right? Are we in the right ballpark on it? And then two, if you think there's more recent or better information available in terms of the cost estimate for those projects that we may not have picked up, let us know and we can make sure that that's brought in. Good job, Matt. No questions.
Yeah, comprehensive information. That's
and it's not like we have how many hundred projects on there,
right?
Cost estimates.
Yeah, but I'll just highlight what you said. That it is we're looking at order of magnitude planning cost estimates. There's certainly lots of refinement that's needed on these as projects, as I think was mentioned earlier, as projects aren't fully defined. We learn more information. So these are high level, trying to make sure that the overall bucket of projects.
Okay, what is the total cost for all these projects? Even though I know this is still an estimate, but at least you get an idea of approximately what the total is.
I don't know the answer to that actually. I think we've been in the details. I haven't looked at the bottom some. I know, Aaron, if you have that more handy.
I don't have it quite yet. That's something we're working on pulling together. But the tricky part with that is we're trying to keep that. There's a lot of bleed over between maintenance and capital costs still here, and we're trying to make sure we get those separated before we turn that into a total number, because particularly on the transit side of things, right, the difference between ops and maintenance versus capital is pretty significant, and those are two kind of very distinct pots of money that we're talking about when we're talking about the financially constrained project list and things like that. So that's something we're still trying to get completely sorted out. But it's gonna, I mean, the original number we'd thrown out there, I think was like 1.4 billion total. I'd suspect that number's probably only gone up since Matt's team went through and updated and escalated costs and things like that. Plus we've added in a few projects since then. So I would say that's something in that range is likely what we'll end up seeing. There has been some cleanup though, like there are definitely some duplicate projects, things that have been combined that will, you know, move it in the other direction. But yeah, that range is probably where we're gonna end up.
And we would probably also like to see that in total, then break it down to CET, you know, bike and ped, and the two, you know, 4 or 5 different categories, just get an idea.
Yep.
What it is.
Yep. No, and that's really our next step as we start moving into the project prioritization, right? And as we start figuring out, okay, well, here's our pot of money to work with, and here's the cost, and starting to line those two things up. Yeah, that's the next step. All right, I think this was. Go ahead.
At what point are we looking at that fund? I know you're probably in the process of looking at funding also, but you know, at what point will that be presented to us also?
So we did.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Right? I would say we did that earlier. Becky Hewitt with Echo Northwest came up with the revenue assumptions, and that was presented probably not last TAC meeting, but the prior one. She presented twice. She did a kind of a during at our first TAC touch point, and then she presented some updated revenue stuff the second one, and she had it broken down both separated both for maintenance and for capital. So we've got those numbers already. There will be some adjustments to those based on the project list, because some of those numbers are kind of affected by the project list, but we have that information. And Tyler, I think you can, I'm sure you can share the presentation that Becky gave from those TAC meetings.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but assuming, Aaron just said that the cost of everything that we've been talking about is, approaching 1.4 billion.
Right.
I think the revenue forecast that we had was
600.
about 600 to 700 million. So prior, we're getting into the tough discussions start next in terms of, if we have only 50% of our funding to meet the need, how do you prioritize projects, within this plan, and how does that influence future, funding decisions by all of our partner agencies?
Good.
And I will say too, I mean, that Kittleson's done some great work here just getting us to this point with the cost estimates, but one of the key needs we've identified through this process is an update to cost estimates on some of these projects. So the key routes projects in particular, that's kind of the genesis for that study that we identified, is we need to, there's several of those key routes projects that the ones that haven't gone into scoping yet that need to maybe be reconsidered from a planning level in terms of what those costs might be.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And I just would, a thought on that is, one, cost estimates should be updated all the time, and some of them are getting a little old. So I think there's probably a need for a more comprehensive across the board. Let's just take a step back and revisit some of these ones we looked at. Also, the key route one highlights an important element of this, which is key routes at the time. Long ago, Rob and I sitting around talking about this with some other folks, is key routes meant a different thing, I think, back in 2018 than what we mean today. And that means the cost should be different to reflect what we're trying to implement. So as project intent changes, the cost to deliver that should go with it. And I think that sometimes there's a gap there in the planning efforts and discussions. So it's a good area to focus on.
Yep. All right. Any other questions? So our next steps. Right now we're in the process. We actually just submitted call it a kind of a CFA sensitivity scenario. So climate friendly area sensitivity scenario to TPAL. So we're getting a model run from them. This is really land use focused model run. So it's a kind of a different land use scenario. We're going to be using that as a data point as we're starting to work through these the project prioritization and creating this financially constrained project list. The high level way we'll use it is essentially projects that maybe only show up as a need in our current MTP project list scenario, but don't show up as significant of a need in the sensitivity scenario. Maybe that could become kind of a tiebreaker that we can use to help us when determining which projects to put on the financially constrained list and which not to. And then we're diving, once we get all the comments from the TAC on this project list. I mean, this is it in terms of the project. So this is your chance to make sure that all the projects that you believe need to be on here are on here. In MTP document terminology, this is essentially the aspirational plus financially constrained plus committed project list that we're looking at, that we're presenting in this memo. So last chance to get a project on there, get a project kicked off that is just not supposed to be there. That's what we're looking for from the TAC on your review of this memo, is just really focusing on that list and making sure it's where we want to be. The costs seem right, and we're ready to once we get that input, then we're ready to move this into the prioritization phase. So next time we meet,
Aaron,
yep.
when do you want comments by?
I think we had, I mean, we've typically been doing 2 weeks, but this is a which, and I don't remember when this went out to the TAC. Did this go out? It went out last Friday. Is that or last
The
Wednesday?
agenda went out a week ago. Yeah, a
Week ago. I mean, normally I'd say 2-week review, so comments within a week. But I guess Tyler and Andrea, what do you think is feasible? It's really important that we get each jurisdiction looking at the project list. I want to make sure that we get those comments, and there's honestly not a lot in the memo to review. It's very similar to the last memo that you already reviewed, and we got good comments on that from the TAC. But the project list itself, I mean, it could use a good review from each jurisdiction.
Would by the end of next week be?
Yeah, a week from Friday, whatever.
So Friday, the 12th.
So the 12th?
Yeah, that would fit with what we're working with.
You're looking for like general priority preference kind of? Or
if there's
general,
just making sure that the projects are there. Gotcha. And that the costs make sense. Priority, if you've got any input regarding priority, that's fine, but we're and you can provide that now. That'll be helpful for us. But the key thing for us is just making sure we're not missing anything, or making sure we're not including or double counting. That's the big one. Double counting any projects, because it's a pretty big list.
Yeah, I think for the county, I would say, I mean, if you could do a quick, yeah, I've reviewed it, but it'd be good to do a review again, looking at the recently adopted county TSP.
Sure.
There are quite a few projects just on the periphery of
Right.
the MPO, and I want to make sure that those are all captured.
Totally,
within this document.
Absolutely, yeah, sounds good.
I just had a question on the CFA model run. So are you assuming, since we haven't designated CFAs yet, are you just assuming the locations we gave to the state in the study, or?
We coordinated this with Brian.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. So
okay, never mind.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
he gave us some input a month ago, which I think is already in some ways somewhat outdated. And that's okay. It's because this is a sensitivity test. It's not something that should be used for anything other than what we're using it for in this exercise. So it's like I said, it's a data point. It's not not something that's going to be used for rulemaking or anything like that.
But I think those assumptions, I mean, I looked at the map yesterday. I think we're looking at, the core area, pretty significant development. Some of the stuff out along Greenwood, like to the east, out towards 27th Street. It seems like there was a third area, Aaron.
Like the OSU area?
Yeah.
Oh, like the west side? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, central west side.
Okay, I think you got them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where they loaded up. For that scenario, I think that's where they loaded up.
Okay.
Reallocated future growth into those areas.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see what it does.
Right.
Yeah. It'll be an interesting exercise, and it may show us something in terms of prioritization, and that's the intent. But it's not meant to be a intensive iterative process. This MTP update is not the place for that. We've got to work with the federal deadlines, but it's just our attempt at kind of taking a peek into the future and making sure that we're making decisions now with the best data available for that.
Thanks.
This is all I had. So if you have any other comments, otherwise that's our update.
Anybody have any other questions or comments for Aaron or Matt? Awesome. Well, thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
So we do have a few minutes just for roundtable. If anybody wants to give any updates on projects or programs that they are working on right now, we've got a few minutes. So
I could talk about the TSP for a minute. Yeah. So we wrapped up second reading for the county's TSP on the 20th, I believe. And so we have 90-day adoption clock until June 18th, and then that new TSP will take effect. I pretty much just immediately tried to go into deliberations for the Tumalo community plan right after that. And that's really only pertinent probably for this group, with that there was about a $70,000 TGM grant from ODOT for active transportation in there. And so there's some sort of refined pieces about transit and some of the improvements for Tumalo Road roundabout proposals, things that were pretty high level, but made it in there through that grant funding. So they deliberated to a pretty soft amendment for what we had originally drafted. They really just asked for limitations on the number of units that could be developed with multifamily housing in Tumalo. There was concern around should a sewer go into Tumalo, that would open the floodgates for big, like 10 unit or more development apartment high-rise things. A lot of people had concerns with that design not being very compatible with the existing character of the community there. I think it's all pretty limited generally with the size of lots and things like that anyway in Tumalo, but that was literally the only concrete amendment that made it in through the deliberative process. So that's coming up, and I think those are sort of our two biggest long-range documents that'll be wrapped up here relatively soon. And then I'm kind of just going into a lot of local things, road namings and stuff like that for the county now. So that's all I have for the county update.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Henry?
Yeah, hey everybody. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that we've scheduled our first public meeting for the joint Riverfront Street project with the city of Bend. That meeting is going to be on April 18th from 5 to 7 at our district office. And this is a very preliminary meeting, and really it's focused on providing project background information, as well as receiving preliminary input from the community to help us develop our design alternatives. So you can find information on our website, as well as on the city's website about that. And yeah, April 18th, 5 to 7 at the district office here in Riverbend Park.
Great. Thanks, Henry. Dave?
Just following up on Tarek's TSP news. I'd just like to acknowledge that Chris Doty and his team at the road department and Tarek and the community development folks just they ran into a lot more work than I think they anticipated due to the community connections part of the TSP, and I just appreciate everybody working hard and getting us to the end of that. It was I think it's a big win. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Dave. Yeah, I made Matt do all the hard stuff. So
It's finally almost over.
I know, I don't even want to say it. Yeah, it's just like, okay, 3 more months.
Yeah.
Some 3 updates and an FYI. One, we are looking to go to bid for a capital plan enhancement now. This will be building on our 2040 master plan and building us a discrete 5-year plan, and also looking at the assumptions in that 2040 plan if they're still valid. As part of that, we're trying to bake in some more technical consulting more broadly. One, we had our electric technology feasibility study a few years ago. Since that came out, there have been different rules at federal level and elsewhere, and different resources available too. So we want to enhance that to create a formal transition plan for conversion to electric vehicles. That's still subject to feasibility, and then the answer isn't we're going to go do it immediately, but it'll look at how we get us there, and more concrete roadmap to get in there. And then just reviewing some other technical pieces, because we have a small team and we're not able to tackle a lot. So we're trying to make a Christmas tree bill for consulting services pretty much. But the main thrust is a capital plan that will bring us a lot of these infrastructure upgrades in the next few years that we desperately need and have planned. Two, we're looking at mobility hubs. We've got the one behind Troy Field that should be getting off the ground shortly here. That is being termed a pilot project, so it's going to have some temporary structures. So a little bit different there, but will be something that we can work with and prove the concept. Second one that we're developing is down Bend South. That's at Ponderosa and Atwood near the new Stillwater Crossing affordable housing apartments. And we're still exploring how this might work for us, and working with partners on what can be done there. Like, for instance, working with schools to make a safe drop-off site there for students. For DRW, this could be a launching pad to enhancing services there of some kind. But it is still exploring phase, and we hope to keep moving on mobility hubs. So progress is happening. And then bus stop improvement project. This is something that we received MPO funds for last year. I disappeared for a few months. We're on parental leave. We lost some staff and just really didn't have capacity to move. But we are looking more seriously at this. I had a meeting with the mayor recently, and this is a priority to demonstrate enhancements to the transit system here and make real improvements to how you get around. And that's not just shelters that we talked about with the MPO funds, but also enhancing wayfinding and making the system more usable. So that'll be coming this summer, and then other big projects this summer. One shout out, we have two. Transit and Trails is coming back. We have a bigger bike trailer for it this year, and we're going to add an extra run. So there'll be 4 runs to the mountain, 5 days a week through the summer. And we're hoping we can keep it the same low price. So excited about that. And we are finally launching service in Redmond. So in Redmond, we do on-demand service. It's dial a ride, but it's open to the general public. We are creating 2, call them flex routes. It's called deviated service in transit jargon, but pretty much it has all the benefits of a fixed route system that can deviate, right? You can request a stop the next block over if we don't have a fixed stop for you. So that'll be coming June 3rd for us, and it's enhancing the Greater Bend transit system. And then last piece, shout out, there's a ODOT Innovative Mobility Grant that is available. This is something we're going to pursue, but it's open to more than just transit providers. So other folks in the room might be interested in that. It's $15,000. Half of the funding is available to nonprofits. So they're structured a little bit differently. So it's open to different people. So if you want to check that out, it's ODOT Innovative Mobility.
Ken?
Just a few updates. So we have we kicked a project off yesterday where we are looking at our riskiest crosswalks on all the state highways across Region 4. There are a couple in Bend that pop up in that top 25% list that we're trying to tackle, notably on that southern portion of US 97, kind of around Ponderosa in that general vicinity. And I can keep the group updated as we move through there. This is kind of a fun data-driven process that we're working through, where we'll come up with a few concepts for crosswalk improvements throughout Region 4. And yeah, I'll keep you all updated on that project. The US 20 facility plan is still working through a few project refinements in the corridor and kind of taking some of the feedback that we got from the city and from our internal staff and prepping that for the facility plan. So they're in the solutions phase for that project. I think Don is going to come give Don Morehouse, my colleague, is going to give a presentation on that sometime in the future. And that might be it for our two notable ones in the MPO area. We're still working through our Lava Butte Path project. Looks like that project is going to go before the Land Use Board of Appeals, and we can keep the group updated in that. We just submitted our letter to participate in the appeal this week. So I'll keep you updated.
All right, thanks, Ken. Anything else? Any city updates?
I mean, the tough, kind of passing, its first hurdle with phase 1 implementation. That was, big for maintenance. And then, one of the projects that I'm gonna be opening is, the League of American Bicyclists, rating application, which is due in July. We're reaching out to a lot of folks here that get a little bit of participation on it.
All right. Nothing else? Excuse me, I'll just move along. Our next TAC meeting is scheduled for May 1st at 10 a.m. And that's all I have. Is there any other, if there's no other questions or comments, we will adjourn the meeting. All right. Thanks, everyone.
You're fine.
You got the control with that panel thing going for it, or the air traffic control.
Yeah. And then it's like,
Oh, no. You're gonna get one first. They're rolling out updates to you. Perfect timing. And the leaf blower.